The music was too loud for the kind of conversation I didn't want to have. I heard Marcus before I saw him. That low, familiar laugh cutting through the noise of the ballroom like something I'd tried very hard to forget. My fingers tightened around my champagne flute, and I made the mistake of turning my head just slightly, just enough to confirm what my stomach had already told me. He was there, 15 feet away, standing near the bar with the same easy posture he'd always had, the kind that said, "I own every room I walk into, even when he didn't own a single thing worth keeping." He was with someone. Of course he was. She was beautiful in that polished, effortless way that made me acutely aware of the fact that my left heel was slightly too tight, and I'd been tugging at the back of my dress since I arrived. I looked away fast, faster than I should have, because fast is its own kind of signal. I hadn't expected him to be here. This was a corporate charity gala on the 42nd floor of the Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago, the kind of event where tickets cost more than my monthly rent, and the floral arrangements alone looked like they'd been flown in from somewhere I'd never been. My boss, Patricia, had given me her +1 at the last minute when her husband got sick. "Go, Scarlett. Network a little. It'll be good for you." I'd borrowed a dress from my neighbor and spent 40 minutes on my hair and told myself it would be fine. It was not fine. My name is Scarlett. I'm 28 years old. I work in grant writing for a mid-size non-profit in the West Loop. I take the Blue Line to work. I meal prep on Sundays. And I was in a relationship with Marcus Webb for 2 years, before he ended it in a text message, an actual text message, 8 months ago. I am a person who has moved on. I am absolutely not moved on. I took a long sip of champagne and shifted my position so my back was more fully angled away from the bar. The room was full, easily 200 people, men in dark suits, women in gowns that probably had names, a string quartet in the corner playing something I couldn't identify. Soft lighting. The kind of soft that makes everyone look like they're living inside a magazine. I was looking for somewhere to set my glass down and disappear into a hallway for exactly 4 minutes when I felt it. Not a sound, not a movement, just a shift. The way the energy of a room changes when something enters it that the room itself seems to recognize. I noticed it first in the people around me. A cluster of men near the eastern wall straightened almost imperceptibly. A woman mid-laugh swallowed the rest of it. A waiter who had been moving with easy confidence through the crowd suddenly found a reason to redirect himself entirely. I turned. He was standing near the entrance to the main hall, and he was doing absolutely nothing. That was the thing. He was just standing there, one hand loose at his side, the other holding nothing, wearing a black suit so precisely fitted it looked like it had been made specifically for this evening, for this body, for exactly this kind of silence. His collar was open at the top, just one button, and beneath the white of his shirt I could see the edge of ink at his throat. Dark, intricate, disappearing beneath the fabric in a way that felt deliberate. Like everything about him was deliberate. He was young, younger than I expected from someone the room responded to that way. Late 20s, maybe 30 at most, with dark hair swept back from a face that was almost unreasonably structured. The kind of jaw and cheekbones that felt almost architectural. But it wasn't his face that held the room. It was the quality of his stillness. The absolute, unhurried certainty that he was exactly where he intended to be. 2 men stood behind him, slightly offset, in suits of their own. They weren't doing anything either, but they were watching everything. I didn't know who he was. I noticed him the way you notice a change in barometric pressure. Not because you've identified it, but because your body has. Then Marcus laughed again, louder this time, and I heard my own name carried in the tail end of it. He hadn't said it, but I was almost certain the woman with him had glanced in my direction. My face went warm. 8 months. 8 months, and he still had the ability to make me feel like I was standing in the wrong room in the wrong dress with nowhere to put my hands. I don't entirely know what made me do it. Maybe it was the champagne. Maybe it was the way the woman beside Marcus had tilted her head in my direction, with that particular brand of curiosity that isn't really curiosity at all. Maybe I just stopped being reasonable for 30 seconds. I turned toward the man in the black suit. He was closer than I'd registered. Or I'd drifted closer without meaning to, pulled by whatever gravity the room had rearranged itself around. He was looking elsewhere when I approached. A slight angle to his jaw, eyes moving through the crowd with a calm that felt almost like indifference. One of the men behind him noticed me first and shifted his weight, and I almost stopped. I didn't stop. "Could you dance with me?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, lower, with a rough edge from trying to hold it steady. I was close enough that he would hear me and no one else would. My ex is watching. I felt immediately insane. I also didn't move. He turned his head then, not his body, just his head, and looked at me. Not through me, not past me, not with the mild surprise a normal person might have had. Just looked. Dark eyes, completely level, taking in my face with an attention that felt like it had weight. Like it landed. The silence lasted 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Long enough that I became aware of my own heartbeat. "Where?" he said. One word. Quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume because the space around it stays still anyway. I blinked. I'd expected him to say no, or to be confused, or to politely redirect me to someone else. I had not expected where. "The bar," I said. "Dark jacket. He keeps laughing." His gaze moved, almost lazily, in the direction of the bar. It didn't linger. It didn't need to. He looked for exactly as long as it took to identify what he was looking for, and then he looked back at me. "Okay," he said, and then he held out his hand. I stared at it for a moment. His hand. Open, palm up, completely unhurried. As if he had already decided everything and was simply waiting for me to catch up. I put my hand in his. The contact was immediate and specific. Warm, firm, fingers closing around mine with a certainty that I hadn't asked for and didn't know how to respond to. He moved, and I moved with him, because not moving wasn't really an option, and we stepped onto the edge of the dance floor where a handful of other couples were already swaying to whatever the quartet had transitioned into. He placed his other hand at my waist, not at the small of my back. At my waist, steady and exact, with a pressure that wasn't possessive. Not yet. I was trying very hard to look like a person who did this all the time. "You don't have to look at me like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like you're waiting for something to go wrong." I almost laughed. Almost. I approached a stranger at a gala and asked him to dance. Something has already gone wrong. The corner of his mouth moved. Not a smile, the suggestion of one. The ghost of an expression that had decided not to fully commit. "Is he still watching?" I asked, and hated myself for asking. He didn't check. "Yes," he said. I exhaled through my nose and tried to relax my shoulders, which had apparently been living somewhere near my ears. The music was slow, and we were moving in a way that qualified as dancing without drawing attention to itself, which was exactly what I needed, and also somehow exactly what I hadn't expected from him. This control, this precision in even the smallest adjustments. "Thank you," I said quietly. I know it's strange. I just needed a minute where I wasn't." "You don't need to explain," he said. I looked up at him. He was watching something over my shoulder, and his expression was the same as it had been when he'd stood by the entrance, unhurried, contained, reading a room that thought it was unreadable. "I'm Scarlett," I said. He looked down at me then, and there it was again. That particular quality of attention. Full, precise, like I had just become the only thing in the room worth looking at. "Tae-jin," he said. I nodded, as if that told me anything. As if I had any idea who I was standing in front of. As if the man behind him hadn't just murmured something to the other, very low, and they had both gone quietly, watchfully still. The music continued, Marcus laughed somewhere behind me, and I felt it less than I expected to. I didn't ask him anything else for the rest of that song. There was something about the way he occupied silence that made small talk feel almost disrespectful, like trying to fill a cathedral with elevator music. So I didn't. I let the quartet play, and let the distance between us stay exactly as it was, close enough to be convincing, far enough that I could still think in something resembling a straight line. What I couldn't stop noticing was his hand at my waist. It hadn't moved. Most men shift, adjust their grip, pull slightly, respond to the music with small unconscious corrections. Taejeon didn't. His hand sat at my waist with the same steadiness it had arrived with, like a decision that had been made once and didn't require revisiting. It should have felt impersonal, clinical even. Instead, it felt like the most deliberate thing anyone had done to me in a very long time. I was looking at his shoulder because looking at his face directly still felt like too much. "He's moving," Taejeon said. "What?" "Your ex. He's moving toward the east side of the room." I resisted the urge to turn around. "Is he coming this way?" "No." A pause. He looked over twice. He's pretending he didn't. Something about hearing that said so flatly, without drama, without the charged undertone that Marcus himself would have used, made the whole thing feel smaller, more manageable. Like Taejeon had taken the information and quietly removed its teeth. "You're very observant," I said. "I have to be." I wanted to ask what that meant. I didn't. The song ended and folded into another, and neither of us stepped back. I wasn't sure who was supposed to make that move, and I got the impression he wasn't going to make it for me, that he'd simply remain exactly where he was indefinitely, completely unbothered, while I decided. There was something almost unnerving about that. A man so comfortable with waiting. "I think I've used up enough of your evening," I finally said. "You haven't." I looked up at him then. He was already looking at me, and there was nothing in his expression that told me whether that was politeness or something else. His face operated on a frequency I didn't know how to tune into. "I don't actually know anyone here," I admitted. "My boss gave me her ticket last minute. I was going to stand near the cheese display all night and call it networking." Something in his eyes shifted. Not amusement exactly, but a kind of recognition. Like he had filed that detail away. "Come with me," he said. "Not would you like to, or if you want. Just come with me." He released my waist but kept my hand, and I followed him because my feet made the decision before my brain could weigh in. We moved through the ballroom and I noticed, again, the way the room adjusted around him. It was subtle. A step back here, a redirected gaze there, a conversation that lowered its volume as we passed. No one approached him. No one stopped him. The two men who had been standing near the entrance materialized again somewhere behind us, not close, but close enough that I could feel their presence like a second perimeter. He led me to a section of the room I hadn't found on my own, a quieter alcove off the main floor, separated by a half wall of frosted glass and a few low arrangements of white flowers. There was a small table, 2 chairs, and a view of the Chicago skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows that stopped me for a moment before I could help it. "Sit," he said, not unkind, just economical. I sat. He took the chair across from me, and almost immediately a waiter appeared with a fresh glass of champagne for me and something amber in a short glass for him that no one had taken his order for. I watched the waiter leave and then looked back at Taejeon. "Do you come here a lot?" I asked, and then immediately regretted how that sounded. "I own the building," he said. I blinked. "This building?" "The hotel, yes." I looked around the alcove, at the window, at the skyline, then back at him. "And you're here for the gala?" "No," he said simply. He picked up his glass and turned it slightly in his hand, a small, idle movement that was the most relaxed thing I'd seen him do. "I was here for a meeting. The gala was incidental." I absorbed that. "So you just happened to be standing in the middle of a charity gala that you weren't attending?" in the middle of a ballroom full of people. Yes. That's not what most building owners do. I'm not most building owners. He said it the same way he said everything, without inflation, without the performative confidence that men with money usually carried like a second cologne. It was just a statement of fact, the most neutral fact in the world, and somehow that made it worse, or better, or something I didn't have a category for yet. I wrapped both hands around my champagne glass and looked at the skyline because it was easier. Chicago spread out below us, all lit geometry and dark water, the lake pressing black against the eastern edge of the city. On a clear night like this, from this high up, everything looked orderly. Planned. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "You can ask." I noted the precision of that answer. Not yes, just, "You can ask." "Why did you say yes? When I asked you to dance, you didn't know me, I just walked up to you." He was quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of someone searching for an answer, but the silence of someone deciding how much of one to give. "You weren't afraid," he said finally. I almost choked on my champagne. I was terrified. Of him. He tilted his head slightly. Not of me. That's unusual. There was no vanity in it. He wasn't preening. He was reporting a pattern, and the pattern, apparently, was that people were afraid of him. The ease with which he said it, the complete lack of apology or explanation, sat somewhere between fascinating and deeply alarming. I should have asked what he meant. I should have laughed it off, or redirected, or checked my phone and said something about needing to get back. Instead, I heard myself say, "Should I be?" He looked at me for a long moment. Those dark eyes, absolutely still. "Probably," he said, and then he looked away toward the ballroom, and I followed his gaze and saw, without quite meaning to, that Marcus had positioned himself at the edge of the main floor, in a way that had a clear sightline to the alcove. He wasn't looking at me now, but the angle of his body said he had been. I felt Tajian register this. I didn't see him move, didn't see him do anything, but there was a change. Something in the air pressure of the small space between us. His jaw shifted barely. His fingers on the glass went still. "He's watching again," I said quietly. "I know. Does it—" I stopped. "What? Does it bother you, being used like this, for whatever this is?" I gestured vaguely between us. "You're being very kind, and you don't have to be. And I realize I haven't even properly thanked you or explained why I—" Scarlett. My name. First time he'd used it. Just my name, and he said it quietly. But it landed like something physical. Like a hand set gently against a door that was opening too fast. I stopped talking. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said. "And I'm not being kind." I frowned. "You let a stranger drag you onto a dance floor. You brought me here. I wanted to," he said. "Those are different things." The city glittered below us, and the music from the ballroom reached us softly, rearranged by distance into something almost ambient. I looked at him. Really looked, for longer than I'd let myself before, and tried to find something familiar in his face. Some recognizable type. Some category I could file him into so I'd know how to behave. There wasn't one. He was watching me do it, too. Watching me try to figure him out with the same calm patience he seemed to bring to everything, like he had nowhere to be, and nothing to prove, and all the time in the world to wait while I caught up. One of the men from the entrance appeared at the edge of the alcove. He leaned slightly toward Taejin and said something in Korean, very low. Taejin's expression didn't change. He responded with 3 words, also in Korean, also without looking at the man, and the man disappeared again. "Do you need to go?" I asked. "Not yet." Not no. Not yes. Just, not yet. I thought about that. About the grammar of a person who speaks only in precise quantities, who gives you exactly what the moment requires and nothing extra. Your ex, he said after a moment, still looking out at the city. How long? 2 years together, 8 months since. I paused. He ended it by text. Taejin said nothing. But something shifted in his profile. Something very small, around the line of his jaw. Not anger. Something colder than anger. More controlled. You didn't deserve that, he said. No, I agreed. I didn't. And I wasn't sure why. Sitting in a glass alcove 42 floors above Chicago, next to a man who owned the building, and had men standing at his back, and said things like, probably when asked if he was dangerous. I wasn't sure why that was the first moment all evening, that I felt something loosen in my chest. Not comfort, exactly. Not safety. Something else. Something that had no name yet, and that I wasn't ready to look at directly. Below us, the city continued being the city. Behind us, somewhere in the ballroom, Marcus laughed again, and Taejin turned his glass slowly in his hand and said nothing more. And I sat with my champagne, and said nothing more. And the silence between us was the most inhabited silence I'd experienced in longer than I could remember. I found out his last name by accident. It was almost 11 when a man in a gray suit approached the alcove. Older, maybe 55, with the careful posture of someone who had spent decades making himself smaller in the presence of larger things. He stopped at a respectful distance, waited for Taejin to acknowledge him, and when Taejin gave the faintest tilt of his chin, the man stepped forward and said very quietly, Mr. Kwon, there's been a development with the Harrington account. Mr. Lee is asking whether you want it handled tonight or... Tonight, Taejin said. Tell him 20 minutes. The man nodded twice, quickly, and left without looking at me at all. As if I were part of the furniture, or as if he had been specifically instructed not to register my presence. I wasn't sure which possibility unsettled me more. Kwon. I turned the name over in my mind and felt nothing attached to it. No recognition, no alarm. But the way that man had said it, that particular combination of deference and precision, like he was handling something that required both hands, stayed with me longer than the name itself. You have to go, I said, not a question. Soon. He looked at me. You'll be all right. Something about the way he said it made it sound less like reassurance and more like a statement of fact he had already verified. Like he had looked at the situation and made a determination. You'll be all right. Confirmed. Filed. I'm always all right, I said, which was mostly true and also completely beside the point. He stood, and I stood because it seemed like the thing to do, and we were close for a moment. Closer than the dance floor had required, closer than the alcove's small table had suggested. I could see the ink at his throat more clearly from here, the lines of it disappearing beneath his collar, dark and complex and deliberate. He smelled like something dry and expensive that I wouldn't have been able to name. Give me your phone, he said. I blinked. What? Your phone. I didn't move for a second, and then I did, because he was already holding out his hand with that same flat patience. And something in me had apparently decided in the last 90 minutes that this man's open hand was not a thing I refused. I unlocked it and placed it in his palm. He typed something, handed it back. If he bothers you tonight, he said, or after tonight. I looked down at the screen. A number, saved under a single character. Not a name. Just T. When I looked up, he was already turning, already moving back toward the ballroom with that unhurried stride, and the two men appeared from somewhere and flanked him with the ease of people who had done it 10,000 times. He didn't look back. I stood in the alcove for a moment holding my phone, the city behind me, the champagne going warm in my glass. Then I went back to the gala. Marcus found me 11 minutes later, which told me he had been tracking my movements and waiting for an opening. I was standing near the silent auction tables, pretending to read the description on a framed photograph of the Grand Canyon, when I heard him say my name. Not loudly. The way he always said it, like it was something he was reminding me he still had access to. Scarlett. I turned around slowly. I'd had 11 minutes to prepare for this moment. And I still felt my stomach do the specific thing it did for Marcus, the thing I hated. That reflexive tensing, that muscle memory of 2 years that my body apparently hadn't finished unlearning. He looked good. He always looked good. That was the thing about Marcus that had taken me the longest to disentangle from what I'd mistaken for love. The fact that he looked like someone you were supposed to want, and he knew it. And he used it with the casual confidence of someone who has never once been told no, and made to believe it. "I didn't know you'd be here," he said, and his smile had that practiced ease that used to make me feel chosen. Now it mostly made me feel tired. "Patricia's ticket," I said. "Right." He glanced toward the alcove, then back at me. There was something different in his eyes. Not jealousy exactly, not yet. Something earlier than that. Something that looked like recalculation. "Who were you with, over there?" "Someone I met. Someone you met tonight." "Yes." He studied me for a moment. Marcus was smart in the way that people who've never had to work very hard can afford to be. Good at reading rooms, good at identifying leverage. I watched him process the alcove, the position, the way we'd been sitting. And I watched something in his expression sharpen, and then deliberately soften, which was always the more dangerous of the two. "You look good, Scarlett." He said it like it was a gift. "Thank you. I've been thinking about calling you." I looked at him steadily. 8 months ago, that sentence would have undone me. Would have sent me home replaying it in every possible tone, extracting meaning from every syllable. I was aware, standing here now, that it still had some pull. That old gravitational field. That familiar ache I'd been working to outgrow. But underneath it, quieter and newer, was something else. The memory of a man standing at a ballroom entrance doing absolutely nothing while an entire room rearranged itself around him. The memory of "You don't owe me an explanation." "You shouldn't call me Marcus," I said. His eyes flickered. "We could just talk." "Get coffee. It doesn't have to be." "I think we said what we needed to say." I kept my voice even. Or you did anyway. By text. That landed. I watched it land. A small tightening at the corner of his mouth, quickly smoothed. "That was a mistake. I know that. I've wanted to tell you that." "Okay," I said. "You just did. I hope that helps." I turned back to the photograph of the Grand Canyon. My hands were steady, which surprised me. He stood there for a moment. I could feel it. That pause where he was deciding whether to push, whether the usual levers still applied. I held still and waited. And after a moment I heard him step back, and then away. I exhaled very slowly through my nose. I stood there another minute, looking at a photograph I had absolutely no interest in, feeling the strange specific relief of a thing you've been afraid of that turns out to be survivable. I was at the coat check pulling on my jacket when I noticed one of Tajin's men nearby. Not hovering. He was standing near the elevator bank, looking at his phone, doing a very convincing impression of someone waiting for a car. But I recognized him from the ballroom. Same suit, same practiced stillness. When I glanced over, he didn't look up. When I moved toward the elevator, he didn't follow. But when I pressed the button and the doors slid open and I stepped in, I caught, in the last second before the doors closed, the small movement of him reaching into his jacket for his phone. I stood in the elevator and stared at the closed doors. He had left someone behind. Tajin had left someone behind to watch the room, or more specifically, to watch me. And the thought arrived in 2 waves. First, a flutter of something warm and disorienting. And then, immediately behind it, a cold clarity. Men who casually leave watchers in hotel lobbies are not men who operate inside the same set of rules as everyone else. I had known this already. I thought. I had known it in the abstract, in the way that you can know something intellectually while your nervous system is busy deciding it doesn't care. My phone buzzed in my bag as I crossed the lobby. A driver is waiting outside for you. Black Suburban. Plates 4AKW 1 and 19. He'll take you home. T. I stopped walking in the middle of the Meridian's marble lobby. He had arranged a car, without asking, without telling me he was going to. He had simply decided that I would have a safe way home and made it happen. The same way he'd said tonight to the man in the gray suit. The same way he'd held out his hand on the dance floor. Not a question. A determination. A thing that was now true because he had decided it would be. I stood there long enough that a bellman gave me a concerned look. Part of me, the reasonable part, the part that took the blue line to work and meal prepped on Sundays, and knew better than to let a stranger with neck tattoos and silent bodyguards make decisions about her transportation. Part of me knew I should call my own car. Should type back a polite thank you, but I'm fine, and put distance between myself and whatever this evening had been. I walked out through the revolving door. The black Suburban was exactly where the text said it would be. The driver, a broad-shouldered man who said nothing beyond Ms. Scarlett, opened the door with the same practiced efficiency as everything else that had orbited Taejin tonight. The interior was warm. There was water in the cup holder that I hadn't put there. I gave the driver my address and watched Chicago pass outside the window. The city rearranging itself at street level now. The grid of it more visible from down here. The 24-hour laundromats and late-night taco stands and delivery cyclists cutting through intersections. Real city. My city. The version of Chicago that had nothing to do with 42nd floors and string quartets and a man who owned the building. I kept thinking about what he'd said. You weren't afraid. Not of me. That's unusual. I thought about the way he'd watched Marcus across the ballroom. That single, economical look, and then the stillness that had followed. The jaw that shifted. The fingers that went still on the glass. I looked down at my phone. At the contact saved under a single letter. I didn't text him, but I didn't delete it either. 3 days passed before anything happened. I went back to my life. The blue line, the grant reports, the Tuesday staff meeting where Patricia asked how the gala went, and I said fine, good, very nice flowers, and didn't mention any of the rest of it. I ate lunch at my desk. I went to the grocery store on Wednesday evening and stood in the cereal aisle for 4 minutes trying to remember what I had at home. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of days that stack up quietly and don't ask anything of you. I didn't text him. I thought about it more than I intended to, which was its own kind of information I wasn't ready to look at directly. I'd replay small pieces, the weight of his hand at my waist, the way he said my name once, just once, like a door being closed gently rather than shut. Probably. The way he'd said probably when I asked if I should be afraid of him, and the complete absence of performance in it. No deflection, no reassurance. Just the truth, measured out in a single word. On Thursday morning, I was at my desk editing a grant proposal for a youth literacy program when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I stared at it. Then, there's a lunch place on Randolph Street. Mira's. Do you know it? I knew it. Small, always crowded. The kind of place that had been there long enough to be trusted. Mismatched chairs, a chalkboard menu, the best roasted tomato soup I'd had in Chicago. I'd eaten there maybe a dozen times. It was 3 blocks from my office. My thumbs moved before I'd fully decided. I know it. Tomorrow. 12:30. Not, are you free? Not, would you like to? Just the time and the implicit architecture of a thing already decided. I set my phone face down on my desk and stared at my grant proposal for a while without reading any of it. I arrived at Mira's at 12:28 and he was already there. Not just there. He had somehow managed to be seated at the one table in the back corner, the one that faced the door and had a clear sightline to the entire restaurant, the one that was always taken by noon on a weekday. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, the collar of a gray shirt open at the throat, and he looked. And this was the thing that caught me off guard. more than the table or the time or any of it. He looked exactly like himself, like he occupied this small, ordinary lunch place the same way he'd occupied the 42nd floor of the Meridian, without adjustment, without performing casualness. One man sat at the counter nearby with a coffee he wasn't drinking. I noticed that too. "You're early," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I'm always early," he said. "Is that a control thing?" The corner of his mouth moved. "Probably." I laughed. Actually laughed, small and surprised. And something shifted in his face when I did. Not much, but enough. We ordered. I got the soup and half a sandwich. He ordered something, and then spoke briefly to the server in a way that made her smile and nod more than strictly necessary, which told me he'd either been here before or had the kind of presence that made people want to accommodate him regardless. I suspected both. "How did you know where I work?" I asked once the server left. He looked at me levelly. "I know a lot of things." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." I studied him across the small table, the clean lines of his face, the ink just visible above his collar, the way his hands rested on the table completely still. In the daylight, in this ordinary room with its mismatched chairs and the smell of soup and coffee, he should have looked like less. Context usually reduces things. Instead, he looked exactly the same size he'd looked at the gala, which was something I didn't entirely know what to do with. "Who are you?" I asked. Not rudely, genuinely. He considered this in that way he had, where the pause felt inhabited rather than empty. "That depends on who's asking." "I'm asking." "Then I'm someone who finds you interesting," he said. "And who wanted to have lunch." I looked at him for a moment. "That's the most deliberately incomplete answer I've ever received." "Yes," he said simply. "Our food arrived, we ate, and he asked me questions, real ones, not the performative getting-to-know-you circuit of first meetings. He asked what I actually cared about in my work, not what my job title was. He asked what I'd wanted to be before I became what I am. When I said I'd almost gone to law school, he said, 'Why didn't you?' And I said money, mostly, and fear, some." And he nodded like both of those were completely sufficient answers, which nobody had ever quite done before. He offered almost nothing equivalent in return. I noticed this, the asymmetry of it, the way he could ask with genuine attention, and receive with genuine attention, and give back very little of his own interior. It should have frustrated me. Instead, I found myself watching him more carefully, looking for information in the way he held his coffee cup, the way his eyes moved when something passed by the window, the way he went briefly and particularly still when his phone buzzed and he looked at it, and then set it face down without responding. "Do you have to?" "No," he said. Already knew what I was going to ask. After a while, I said, "My ex called me last night." Something in Taijin's posture didn't change, and also entirely changed. "What did he say?" "That he wanted to talk, that he'd been thinking." I turned my soup spoon over. "The usual." "What did you say?" "Nothing. I didn't pick up." He looked at me steadily. "Good." One word, and yet the weight that he put inside it, quiet, definitive, with something underneath that I might have called satisfaction, if satisfaction were made of something colder and more controlled, landed with a specificity that made me very aware of the space between us. "He's not a bad person," I said, and I wasn't sure why I felt the need to say it. "That's not the point," Taijin said. "What's the point?" "He had you," he said, "and he let you go by text message." His eyes held mine. That tells me everything I need to know about him. The restaurant moved around us, spoons against bowls, a burst of laughter from a table near the window, the server calling out an order to the kitchen. And in the middle of all of it, I sat with that sentence and felt it rearrange something small in my chest. I looked down at my soup. "You're very certain about people." "I have to be," he said. Same thing he'd said on the dance floor. Same answer, same quiet finality. Because of your work? I asked carefully. He picked up his coffee. Yes. What is your work exactly? He looked at me over the rim of the cup, that long, level look. Investments, he said. Real estate, acquisitions. All true, I thought. And also not remotely all of it. I didn't push. I didn't know yet whether that was wisdom or cowardice. But I let it sit, and he let me let it sit. And we finished lunch, and he paid before I had even reached for my bag. Not performatively, just efficiently, the way he did everything. Like generosity was also something that didn't require discussion. Outside on Randolph Street, the November air was sharp, and the city was doing its midday thing. Cabs, cyclists, a food truck on the corner with a line. He walked me back toward my building, which was either a coincidence or not, and I suspected not. At the entrance, he stopped. I turned to face him. Same number? I said. Same number, he confirmed. I nodded, started to turn, then stopped. Taejin. First time I'd used his name, I watched something register in his face, the faintest shift. There and gone. Why me? Out of everyone at that gala, you could have said no. He looked at me for a moment with that complete, unhurried attention. You walked up to me, he said, like you had no idea what I was, like I was just a person at a party. He paused. I've forgotten what that feels like. I didn't know what to say to that. I wasn't sure there was a thing to say. He held my gaze for one more second, then looked up at the building behind me, a quick, automatic scan, the kind I was beginning to understand he did everywhere. And then he turned and walked back into the city, and the man from the counter at Mira's fell into step somewhere behind him, and within half a block, the crowd had taken them both. I stood on the sidewalk in the cold and watched the space where he'd been. That evening, Marcus texted, Can we please talk, Scarlett? I miss you. I read it in my kitchen while my pasta boiled, leaning against the counter, coat still on. I thought about the alcove, the city 42 floors below. He had you, and he let you go by text message. That tells me everything I need to know about him. I set my phone on the counter. I didn't respond. For the first time in 8 months, not responding didn't feel like restraint. It didn't feel like the careful, effortful choice I'd been making every time I'd held myself back from reaching out to him in those first raw weeks. It just felt true. Like the most accurate thing I could say was nothing, and nothing was finally enough. I finished making dinner. I ate at my table by the window. The city was doing what it did at 7 on a Thursday, settling into itself, lights coming on in the buildings across the street. Someone's television blew behind a curtain. I thought about a man who said he'd forgotten what it felt like to be treated like just a person. I thought about how strange it was that the most guarded person I'd ever met was also, in some specific and quiet way, the most honest. My phone buzzed. I looked at it expecting Marcus, my stomach already tensing. It was a different number, same one from before. Get home safe. 3 words. Past tense already. He'd known I was home, or close enough. Which meant someone had told him. Which meant the man from Mira's, or someone else entirely, had seen me to my block and reported back without my knowing. I should have been unsettled by that. I sat with it and waited for the unsettled feeling to arrive. It didn't come, or it came tangled with something else so completely that I couldn't separate them. That wire-thin awareness that I was being watched over by someone who had decided, without asking my permission, that my safety was something that mattered to him. Quietly, without announcement. The way he did everything. I typed back, I'm home. A pause. Then, I know. I stared at those 2 words for a long time. The call came on a Sunday. Not from Taejin. From a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, clipped and professional, saying she was calling on behalf of Mr. Kwan, and that he was requesting my presence at an address in River North that evening if I was available. The phrasing was so careful, so precisely optional sounding, that I understood immediately it wasn't really optional. Not because there was any threat in it, just because I had started to understand how his world operated. Every door held open with perfect courtesy. Every choice framed as yours to make. And underneath all of it, a current of intention so steady it might as well have been a wall. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I took a cab because it felt important to arrive in my own way, in my own time, even if someone was probably watching the route. The address was a townhouse on a quiet block in River North. Narrow, dark brick, a single light above the door. No sign of anything. No indication from the outside that it was anything other than a private residence, which I had the distinct impression was entirely the point. The door opened before I knocked. Inside was warmer than I expected. Not a cold, controlled space, but something that felt, oddly, lived in. Bookshelves, low light. A kitchen visible through an archway that smelled like something had been cooked recently. The man who let me in was one I recognized from the gala, and he directed me toward a back sitting room with a nod, and then disappeared. Tajan was standing at the window. He turned when I entered, and for a moment neither of us said anything. He looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not visibly, not the ordinary kind. It was something around his eyes, something that the controlled surface of him hadn't entirely managed to cover. He was in a dark sweater rather than a suit jacket, which was such a small thing and somehow felt significant, like a layer removed. "You came," he said. "You asked." Something moved across his face. "Sit down, Scarlett." I sat. He stayed standing for a moment longer, looking at me with that particular quality of attention that I had stopped trying to deflect and started simply receiving, because deflecting it had turned out to require more energy than I had. Then he sat across from me and said, "There's something you need to know." My stomach tightened. "Okay. Your ex, Marcus." He said the name the way you'd say a word in a language you found imprecise. "He's been asking about you, about who you were with at the gala." I went still. Asking who? People he shouldn't be talking to. His jaw shifted, that small controlled movement I'd learned to read. He found a name, my name, and he made some inquiries. The room felt smaller suddenly. What kind of inquiries? The kind that tell me he's either very stupid or very reckless. He looked at me directly. "Do you know what I am, Scarlett? What I actually am?" The question sat in the air between us. I thought about the men who stood at his back, the car that appeared without asking, the hotel he owned, the way rooms rearranged themselves around him, the way a man in a gray suit said his name like he was handling something that required both hands. "I have a general idea," I said carefully. "Then you understand why someone asking my name in the wrong places is not a small thing." I did understand. I understood it in a way that had been assembling itself quietly in the back of my mind since the gala. Piece by piece, the shape of it emerging slowly, and me choosing not to look at it directly, because looking at it directly would have required a decision I wasn't ready to make. "Is he in danger?" I asked. Tajan's expression didn't change. "He's been handled." "What does that mean?" "It means he was given a very clear message," he said, "by someone whose job is to deliver clear messages, and that Marcus Webb will not be calling you, texting you, or asking questions about you again." The room was very quiet. Outside somewhere a car passed. I sat with what he'd just told me and felt the layers of it, the protection underneath, the possession underneath that, and underneath everything the unsettling, complicated truth that I didn't feel the way I probably should have felt. I didn't feel afraid. I didn't feel angry. I felt something that I was going to have to be honest with myself about eventually. "You did that without telling me," I said. "Yes. You made a decision about my life without asking me." "Yes." He held my gaze. "I would do it again." I exhaled slowly. Taijin. He was using my name in rooms where my name is currency, he said, quietly but with an edge now. The first real edge I'd heard from him. That put you in proximity to things that I will not allow you to be in proximity to. I don't apologize for that. I looked at him. Really looked. The way I'd been allowing myself to do more and more, looking for the seams, for the place where the control ended, and something more exposed began. And I found it. Right there. Not in anger. In the set of his mouth. In the way his hands were very still on his knees. In the fact that he had called me here on a Sunday evening to tell me this himself, in person, rather than sending a message or saying nothing at all. He could have said nothing. I would never have known. You didn't have to tell me, I said. No. He agreed. Why did you? A pause. Longer than his usual pauses, which were already longer than most people's. Because you walked up to me at a party like I was just a person, he said. And I told you that was unusual. What I didn't tell you is that I've spent a very long time making sure no one gets close enough to see anything real. And you... He stopped. Looked at the window briefly, then back at me. You keep looking at me like there's something worth seeing. The words landed in the space between us and stayed there. I thought about everything I knew, and everything I didn't. About the shape of the world he moved through. The weight of it. The danger of it. The way it required him to be always contained. Always watching. Always 3 steps ahead of everything. About the men at his back who never left. About a life so armored that someone treating him like an ordinary person at a party had been enough to make him stop. I thought about what it cost him to sit here in a sweater instead of a suit and tell me something true. I'm not going to pretend I fully understand what you are, I said, or what all of this is. I'm not going to pretend that this is normal or simple, or that I know exactly what I'm choosing. I paused. But I'm still here. I came here tonight. And I think we both know I didn't come because someone on the phone made it sound optional. Something broke open in his face. Barely, contained almost immediately, smoothed back into that careful surface. But I saw it. One unguarded second, real and unarmored, and it was the most human thing I'd witnessed from him, and somehow the most devastating. He stood, and I stood, and he crossed the small distance between us and stopped close enough that I could see the detail of the ink at his throat. Close enough that the warmth of him was something I was aware of without contact. His hand came up and tucked a strand of hair back from my face. One motion. Careful and certain, and entirely his. You should understand something, he said quietly. I don't do things halfway. I don't decide something and then undecide it. If you stay... He paused. It means something different in my world than it might in yours. I know, I said. You'll have people watching out for you, not always visible, not always comfortable. I know. And I will not always be able to explain why I do what I do. His eyes held mine. But I will always tell you the truth when I tell you anything. I stood in that room in a townhouse in River North on a Sunday night in November, and looked at a man who had spent his entire adult life making sure no one could reach him. And I felt the full weight of what was being offered, and what was being asked, and the fact that there were no guarantees of any kind in either direction. Okay, I said. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then, almost slowly, the corner of his mouth moved. And this time it didn't stop. This time it became a real thing, quiet and small, and entirely unperformed, and it rearranged his whole face in a way that made him look, briefly, like someone who had just set something heavy down. He didn't kiss me. He took my hand instead, the same way he had on the dance floor, deliberate, certain, fingers closing around mine, and led me toward the kitchen, where something was still warm on the stove, and where, for the first time since I'd met him, there were no men standing at the perimeter, no room to read, no performance of any kind. Just a kitchen, 2 people, a Sunday evening, I sat at his counter, and he poured me something warm, and we talked for 3 hours about things that had nothing to do with power or danger or the shape of the world he moved through, about the city, about books, about the particular loneliness of being very capable in a life that sometimes felt too small for you. He told me about Seoul, about leaving at 19 with nothing resolved, about the specific cold of Chicago the first winter he spent here. Small things, real things, offered carefully, one at a time, like someone relearning a language they'd stopped speaking years ago. I drove home at midnight in a car I didn't call. I sat in the back and watched the city go dark and quiet around me, and I didn't think about Marcus at all, not once, not even at the edges. 8 months of carrying that absence like a bruise, and tonight, it was simply gone, replaced by something that had no clean name yet, something unresolved and complicated, and shot through with a particular kind of fear that had nothing to do with danger. The car stopped in front of my building. The driver wished me a good night. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment in the cold and looked up at my building. Ordinary, familiar, mine. And I understood with a quiet certainty that something had shifted beneath the surface of my life in a way I wouldn't fully see for a while yet. The ground had moved, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough that nothing would sit in quite the same place it had before. My phone buzzed. Sleep well. I stood there in the November dark, holding my phone, and I thought about a man in a sweater sitting in a kitchen in River North who had told me the truth on a Sunday night, because he thought I deserved to hear it from him directly, who had put a bodyguard in a hotel lobby without telling me, who said I would do it again without apology and meant it in both directions, protection and possession, and something underneath both that was still finding its shape. I typed back, "You too." I put my phone in my pocket and went inside. I wasn't the same person who had stood in a borrowed dress in a hotel ballroom 2 weeks ago, trying to figure out where to put her hands. I could feel the difference. Not loudly, not in any way I could have easily explained. Just a quiet internal shift, like a compass that had been slightly off for a long time and had finally found north. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know how you love someone who lives inside a world like that, or whether love was even the right word yet for something this new and this complicated. I didn't know how much I would have to learn, or unlearn, or hold space for. But I had walked into that room tonight knowing, and I had stayed. And in the end, that was the only thing I was certain of. That staying had been the truest thing I'd done in longer than I could remember.